Hi everybody. In this video, I just want to take a few minutes and talk about the basics of ggplot2, which is what we were going to do today, and then I'm going to let you kind of explore. I think my slides, especially for these, are fairly self-explanatory, and so I'm going to ask you to read through them and do the your turns on your own. I'm not going to stop in the video um, for the your turns, and I'm not going to go over all the slides, um, but I think we'll get through the important ones to give you an idea of how to start. And so, as I said before in the few slides that I got through on Monday, that we are going to use a plotting package library called ggplot2. I guess a quick note is that it's not the only plotting window, not the only plotting package, not the only plotting library, not the only thing that you can make plots with in R. There are a lot of plotting functions in base R that just come with R. It's a different way of thinking, a different way of plotting. If you want to look online, though, you will find lots of base plotting stuff. I ask that you exclusively use ggplot in this class, and I'll make sure to mention that in assignments, so on and so forth. But other things do exist, and I will show you other things. I just ask that we use ggplot pretty much exclusively in the course. And so in front of GG in front of plot is GG, which stands for Grammar of Graphics. And I talked a little bit about the Grammar of Graphics. And so from the Grammar of Graphics, we have that every plot needs really three things. It really needs three things. The first is data. So I think that's obvious. You need data with aesthetics. Now, we're going to talk a lot about aesthetics in this lecture. You can think of aesthetics as variables in the data. Okay, so you just need to express, what we're going to try to do in the plotting is expressing how you want your plot to look by telling it where you want your data to be. So I want this variable on the x-axis. I want this variable on the y-axis. I want this variable to correspond to color, so on and so forth. We'll get there. So you need one data and you need two layers. Layers composed of geometric objects, statistical transformations. Okay, so that's the, I went too far forward there. Really, you need two things, okay? Data with aesthetics, so you need the data, you need the variables that you're interested in, and then you need to tell the graph what kind of geometric object it needs to use to make the plot, okay? So that might be geometric objects called geomes. We're going to see geomes a lot. And it might also be statistical transformations. So I might have data and I want to make a histogram. And so you need to tell it, or it is going to know, when you tell it, I want a geometric object of histogram, it needs to know what to do to get that histogram. So for instance, a histogram is a range of values. So you cut the data into ranges, you count how many objects are in that range, and then the height of the bar inside the histogram is the number of observations in that range. Okay, and so that's a statistical transformation that you need to do, that the code needs, that ggplot needs to know how to do. Okay, you're not going to have to make those statistical transformations by hand, but when you choose a histogram, it's going to have to know that it needs to do that histogram transformation. Now, some extra things that we will get to that I probably won't cover in this video, but I will cover on Friday quickly, are scales, a coordinate system, and a facet specification, and a theme. Okay, so those are sort of the extra things that come along that it needs, but that you aren't going to control every time you make a plot. Really, all that you need to know, all that you need to control are the data, the variables, so the data, the aesthetics, and the geomes. Everything else kind of comes along with it. Okay. Scales, a coordinate system, a facet specification, and a theme. And so each of those mean their own specific thing. Some of them make sense, like a coordinate system. We need to know what kind of coordinate system we're working in, of course. But the other ones may be a little more opaque. All right, and so this is code to make a ggplot. Okay, so first, of course, you would need to install the ggplot2 package. Now, ggplot comes in the tidyverse. Okay, so really you only need to install and load the tidyverse. And when you load the tidyverse, it's also going to load ggplot2. Okay, but when you load the package, then you have access to functions, the basic function, ggplot. Okay, and so you always start a ggplot with a call to ggplot, okay? The function called ggplot. Inside ggplot, the first thing that you usually give it, or the first argument of the function, is the data. Right? Now, what I've done here that I won't do as we go later on is be explicit about where about the names of the arguments of the function. So inside of ggplot, I said data equals mpg. Okay, so there's a data set in R called mpg, and so that's what I used here. Data equals mpg. Great. So that's the first part. You don't necessarily need the data equals to if you know what you're doing, but it's helpful at the beginning. Okay, excuse me. The second argument of the function is the mapping. This is the aesthetics, okay? And it's always initiated by the AES function, or aesthetic function, okay? And so aesthetics, x equals dispel, y equals highway, separated with a comma, right? And so that tells you, well, what do I want on the x-axis? Dispel. What do I want on the y-axis? Highway. Okay, plus geom point. So you gave it the data and aesthetics in the ggplot call. You gave it the geom afterwards. The interesting part that you'll see in ggplot that exists nowhere else is the use of plus, which seems odd and is a bit odd, okay, but it's just how it works. So you add things together with a plus here. Nowhere else will we do that but in ggplot, okay? But anyway, it makes this plot or something similar. Your background might be different, okay? This is a little bit more advanced plot. I added one more thing. I said color equals class inside my aesthetic call, and so then you can assess what changed. It's the same plot, but now the points are colored. They're different colors, and the colors correspond to, seemingly, a different class of car. Right? Each of the things inside aesthetics, inside the AES call, are the aesthetics. Okay? There are a number of different aesthetics. Here I use 3, X, and Y, which are the most common. Color, size, shape, anything that you can do to the plot is an aesthetic. Okay. So I talk about a diamonds data set here. You can read this and do stuff about the diamonds. I show you some diamonds. Okay. And I have a little animated slide here that talks about aesthetics. You map, it's a mapping, so it's a function really that maps variables to elements of a graph. The important thing that you need to know that an aesthetic is always a variable in your data set. Okay? If you want the variable of the data set to be included in the graph in some form or fashion, it needs to be inside the aesthetic call. Okay? Being inside versus outside that function, that AES function, is very important. Okay? There's a lot of aesthetics so you can use them to make complex graphs, but my warning here is that there is such a thing as a graph that is too busy, that is too full, that has too many aesthetics. Okay, and so coming back quickly to the point of a call being inside versus outside this AES function. So I want you to take some time if you're following along, which I hope you are. This is diamonds. This is the diamonds data set. X carrots on the x-axis, prices on the y. I want you to try to make this plot. Okay, so pause the video if you want. Take some time to do that now or later. Okay, and so the first thing that I can do, I guess really I have two different choices. I might say, well, color, so clearly the points are green. All of them are green. It doesn't really help the plot, but I just made them green. And so the question is, do I choose 1 or do I choose 2 here? So do I choose this, where color equals green inside the aesthetics, or do I choose this, right down here, caret price? Also notice I didn't say x equals caret, y equals price. X and y are the first two options inside the AES function. Okay. And I put it down in the geom call. I'll talk more about that in class. If I try the first one, it does this. Gives it a color, but the color is red, and it calls that green. This is in fact not what we want. Anything inside the aesthetics should be a variable. If I wanted to map a color to a variable in my data set, then I'd put it in here. But now what it's trying to do is map the color to green. Now it might look for green in the data set as a variable, but of course it's not going to find green there. So it's going to make its own version of green. Okay, it's going to make its own version of green. It turns out there's like only one of them. It doesn't change with the data, so they're going to call them all green. But there's also default colors in how you'll see if you make more than one thing. The first color is red, the next color is blue, so on and so forth. And so, unless you specify otherwise. And so here it defaults to the first color, which is red, and it just calls it green. Okay. Outside of the aesthetic, it's going to change the actual color of the points. Okay. So you can change them. That's how you do it. Okay, but you don't put it inside the aesthetics unless you want it to be mapped to a variable inside of here diamonds. Okay, then I move on to scales. So scales are this. So scale is the color. So if I want to change the color, so by default I run this and it gives me these colors. Maybe I don't like the colors, so I can change the scale to be a hue color or another color. And so here is the basic, here is a basic color chart, okay, that someone else has made that I've stole, so I put credit down here. For color, if you have a discrete variable, categorical or just numbers, okay, but like whole numbers, you get a rainbow of colors, a discrete scale of them. Continuous, it's a gradient, and that's basic how it goes. Color, size, shape, alpha, so on and so forth. Okay. Now these are fairly standard, but I believe actually something small changed in a recent version of ggplot2, so I'll talk about that change if I remember on Friday. It's not really going to affect us. Okay, all right, so that's the scales. Geoms I want to keep going to geomes because they're the other important object. So a, a geome, it stands for geometric object. I think that's fairly clear. They're made up of basic graphical elements, points, lines, so on and so forth. And there's a lot of geometries that you can use and make in ggplot. Okay. And so then I go and I talk through these plots here. You can look through. I ask you to make some plots changing different geomes. Okay. And then lastly, facets are, what if I don't like a bunch of stuff being on one plot? Maybe I could split them up, and I do that with facets. Okay. Coordinate systems, we're not going to come into contact with a lot. The most I might come in contact with them is if I want a different coordinate system. For instance, I want to make a pie chart. It is actually quite difficult to make a pie chart in ggplot. Okay? And if you've taken a course with me before, which some of you have, you'll know that my disdain for pie charts. And so I don't really like pie charts for various reasons. And neither did the people who make ggplot. And so they made it hard to make a pie chart. But I've made a pie chart here, and I've had to actually change my coordinate system to a polar coordinate system and do some other things. Okay, but the code is right here, so you can try to follow what's going on. Okay. I have some other options of coordinate systems, not changing the whole system, but maybe changing the ratio of the plot. Okay. This is a special function here called ggvariety that you can't, it doesn't exist in ggplot, so don't try to use it, but just marvel at it. Okay. Lastly is a theme. What do you want the theme to be? Basically the background. What do you want the background to be? I, by default, and you'll see in class, always, I run some code right at the beginning of all of my scripts that change the background to theme black-white. I don't like the gray theme, which is the default theme. Okay, I like the black-white theme, and so I always default it to theme BW, but you can default it to whatever you want. Okay, and then I'll talk also a bit on Friday about extension packages. Packages that build off of ggplot to do extra special things, and there are a lot of them. So I didn't update this number, and so I know it's higher than 63 now. Okay, but I have here's one example here called ggAnimate that will actually make a series of, or it'll make a GIF of data that moves here over time. So it makes a sort of interactive plot, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's where I'm going to stop because the video has already gone on probably too long than what you want. And so take time, read through the slides, and then we'll quickly discuss on Friday before we move on to new things. Okay, enjoy the snow and the snow day that just happened a few minutes ago.